resources isn't just about money. It's how do you spend your life? How do you spend your time? Of course, as you know, money is a triggering conversation for a lot of couples. And so often I'll find when couples come to me and they're struggling and they think that they're just arguing about one thing. But underlying that, they've got these judgments of how the other person relates to resource management.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Emily, and we are back for another episode talking about all things love and money. Today, I'm really excited to have Laura Cannon here on the show with me. Laura is a serial entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in the wedding industry. As the founder of Ceremony Officiants, DC Elopements, and Online Marriage, Laura has personally written and performed more than 1,000 marriage ceremonies, including mine and Channing's. She is a certified professional wedding officiant and serves as the president of the International Association of the Professional Wedding Officiants. In addition to her officiating expertise, if that weren't already enough in so many different fields, Laura is also a certified meditation teacher, and she integrates mindfulness practices into her work, helping couples create meaningful wedding ceremonies and fulfilling relationships. With a passion for entrepreneurship, Laura is also a sought-after coach to entrepreneurs and best-selling author of The Conscious Entrepreneur. Thank you so much for being here today, Laura.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I'm so glad to see you again and to be here with you. Yes, it was so fun to get to perform the wedding for you and Channing, and it was just such a joy. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, I know one of the things that Channing and I look back on that moment and talk about was how it felt like the ceremony was so personalized. So thank you again for making that possible. It really felt like our friends and family got to connect more with who we were as the couple through all the great work you did putting together that ceremony.
Thank you so much.
And as someone, who has personally officiated over 1,000 weddings and served thousands more couples through all of your companies, you've undoubtedly gained so many unique insights into the world of marriage preparation. Are there any key lessons that you've learned about couples as they prepare for marriage?
Great question. Yes, I would say the first thing is that oftentimes couples forget that preparing for a wedding is not the same thing as preparing for a marriage. It's so easy to get wrapped up in all the details, of this really grand celebration. And that's so wonderful. Weddings are so fun. And yet, we really need to spend that same effort preparing for what our relationship is going to be like, for, really creating this solid foundation for a lifelong partnership. So, when I'm working with couples, I really see myself as a support, not just for them in creating this really beautiful ceremony that's a reflection of them and, like you said, helps their family and friends connect with them even deeper, but also that is acting as this grounding force to help them continually refocus on what the day is really about. It really is about this lifelong commitment to grow in partnership together. And in terms of what lessons I have learned, I really think that it cannot be overstated. Communication is key. So whether this is communicating about the details of the wedding day and the celebration, communicating about what your partnership is going to look like after marriage, that is the most essential ingredient because, we have life's ups and downs. We're always going to have times that are challenging and times that are easier. And the thing that can help ease our life is really having a partner that we can communicate well with. And so I really think that that is the key lesson I've learned, is that the better a couple can communicate with each other, the more prepared they'll be to face the challenges ahead.
And, from the perspective of a couple who's in the thick of wedding planning, and I know we were guilty ourselves of it at the time, how do you carve out the time to talk about communication and work on that as something to prepare for marriage?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I used to get that question a lot. Like, okay, well, we want to be intentional, but what do we do? And so years ago, I wrote this ebook called The Marriage Manifesto, and I invited couples to really set aside a date night. Set aside a time of several hours. You could do a home date, doesn't have to be fancy. And I would invite them to take this resource of the Marriage Manifesto and go through it together. It's a guidebook to have questions to ask each other to be better prepared for marriage, but to actually put this on your list of to-dos, right? When we're planning a wedding, there's a million to-dos, but we really need to make sure carving out that time for intentionality. So a lot of times couples are wanting to write their own vows or at least write their own intentions. So I actually make that part of the couple's planning process is even if they don't intend to share their own vows, for them to take some time and think about, well, what is it that they're really committing to in their marriage? Because, we get engaged, someone pops a question, we say, I do. Or we mutually decide together that we're getting married, but we don't really say, well, what does marriage really mean to us? Every couple's marriage is going to be a bit unique. And so even if you're going to say traditional vows, sickness and in health, probably in your mind, you have other expectations, whether they've been communicated or not, about what a marriage is. And so I really think just making this part of your wedding planning process to sit down and get really intentional about what do we want our life to look like. I think it's just so important.
Yeah. And for those of us who are listening in and who are already married, would you also have any tips for that? If you're like, oh, shoot, I'm listening to this and actually we didn't get around to talking about some of these questions, or it was such a whirlwind and we just didn't, even know that we should be carving out that time.
Absolutely. It's never too late. It's never too late to become aware. So, I have a lot of couples who, are not choosing to do premarital counseling or premarital coaching. And, because they're doing all of these other preparations and they feel like, hey, we've been together already for a while. I think we know what we're doing here. And then they might get to a point where they realize like, oh, these are some things we didn't talk about and maybe we should be more intentional. And so one of the things that I do with my partner is we set aside, one day a week where we do our weekly temperature check. And our temperature check is where we start out by sharing something that the other person did that we really valued and really supported us. And we're just giving gratitude for that. And then it's a bit like a report card, so it's kind of like you did really great in this, but here's a place where I could have used some more support. And it's really just like this great way to keep it as part of your relationship because even if you sit down with these intentions in the beginning, the thing in life that is constant is impermanence and change, and things will change. And so this is meant to be kind of a living document. This is meant to be something that you're walking with in your relationship and in your marriage. So again, just setting aside time. And we actually do a couple different ones. So we have our temperature checks, and then we also have our money meetings. And our money meetings aren't so much about what's happening with our daily expenses, but we're visioning how is it that we are now reprioritizing what's important to us in the expenditure of our resources. Obviously, in the beginning, before we had children, we weren't thinking about saving for college as being something necessary. So, again, back to impermanence, these things change. So just being really flexible, knowing it's never too late, not being afraid to get coaching or counseling. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your relationship. That's just something that can support everyone. But I think having these touchstones along the way can be really, really helpful.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned there was about premarital counseling. And I know so oftentimes premarital counseling has, came from, I think, more of like religious institutions. Is that still really the practice nowadays? Or if you aren't religious, is there, premarital counseling that could be a fit?
Yes, absolutely. So for what I do, I call it premarital coaching as opposed to counseling because I'm not offering therapy. Instead, I'm taking couples through a guided process of learning how to become better communicators, talking through and having kind of a third neutral party as they work through some of these things. But certainly, going to a therapist for actual couples counseling is really, really helpful. It's not the premarital counseling of the past. So there is certainly still religious counseling that you can receive from your minister, from a church. Those things are still provided, but I think more and more couples now are really looking for convenience. They're looking for ease. They just want a way that they can get this support that's, not necessarily religious in nature. And I really love, there's a wonderful startup company called Ours. And I love what they're doing. They've pivoted a little bit. Before they were offering guided conversations for couples. And now what they're doing is they're giving couples the opportunity to do premarital counseling with a therapist right there on their computer from home, like a telehealth session. And I think that those things are so valuable to just have the perspective of someone else. We often forget that when we're struggling, it's not just us, that these problems are not often unique, which sometimes just hearing that and normalizing, hey, all couples face these questions and challenges can just be really supportive and helpful.
Yeah. Well, we love what Adam is building at Ours and are a big supporter as well. One thing I am also curious about there is, I think for so many people in this generation, I think we're really tipping over to it. But for a while, going to see a couple therapists felt almost like this admission of like, things are on the rocks. Things are really bad. Is that changing? What have you seen in that?
Well, I think it should change. If it hasn't changed already, it definitely should. Yeah, I think that there used to be a stigma and just like there was a stigma before when couples used to come to me 20 years ago and I would ask them how they met, they would get really shy if the answer was they met in a bar. They would feel really shy about saying that. And then when people started to meet on the internet, and then that became a way of the, Match.com and things like that, then they would feel embarrassed about that. So, a lot of things are like that. And certainly that's been the case in the past with therapy is like you said, people feel like it's some admission of we have a problem that we can't solve. And I just don't see it that way at all. That's why I call what I do coaching, because I'm starting from the premise that you two have everything you need to be a success. Just like a sports team, they don't go out there without a coach, even though these are, these people are paid millions of dollars. They're excellent players. They know how to do what they do well. You can be having all the best intentions in marriage. And sometimes it can just be really helpful to have that coach, to have that support. So I think looking at it in that way just kind of takes that stigma out of it. We're just saying, hey, we're just being coached so that we can be our best.
Yeah. I like that comparison a lot too. It's almost like the bar being the modern day old school romance now, but something that's very normal nowadays, and internet dating now and meeting on apps too, increasingly normal. And hopefully, and I'm with you on that, hopefully financial therapy and couples therapy is also the next frontier, because something that has been super helpful for even Channing and I is talking about things before it becomes an issue.
Yes. Goes back to that communication piece. Can't be said enough.
Yeah. One of the things that I know you talk about communication in your book, The Marriage Manifesto, you also mentioned some really big questions. And I feel like they're almost like the big questions that people don't want to admit that they have, especially when they're getting married. But it's that little voice at the back of your head, which is almost like, we're happy now. What can we do to make sure we stay that way? Would you have any advice for couples who want to stay proactive there?
Oh, yes. Again, it's going to sound like, I'm I'm just hammering this communication point, but it really can't be said enough. If you made your goal just to continually become a better communicator, I can guarantee that will lead to a great deal of happiness and a relief of suffering in your relationship. We see all these different kinds of surveys about, what are couples fighting about in marriage. Obviously, finances are a big one, but managing emotions and managing expectations often show up on these surveys as well. And of course, great to talk about before marriage, but even more important than the content, even more important than whether it's finances or whether it's emotion, is really establishing some type of framework that you can use to be able to navigate these difficult conversations. And so I'd love to share this with your listeners, but this is actually an actual tool that you can go use. You could put it in practice today. I love going through this with couples. It can feel a little clunky when you first try to communicate in this way, but this is a formula that once you learn how to communicate like this, it can make all of life a bit smoother. So it's called the 3-step dialogue. Mm-hmm. And basically, I use this with my children too, but it has 3 basic steps. So the first is sending and mirroring information. The second is validating. And the third is empathy. So what you would do is you would have both of you say, okay, we're going to now do the 3-step dialogue. And here's what I mean by it being clunky. Because when you pull this out, let's say that things have gotten heated. You're in a heated conversation. You did this. No, you did this. Mm-hmm. Someone needs to pull the card and say, hey, actually, we're both a team. We both want the same thing. So let's try this way of communicating. So the first person, you have a receiver and a sender. So the person that is sending, they're going to say all of what they're upset about, but here's the key. It has to be in ways that are objective and only focus on what's arising in you. So, and then the receiver has to do a really good job, and I'm not saying it's easy, but of listening as if the other person is talking about someone other than you. So you're trying to listen as objectively as possible, and you're not trying to interpret or stop them. And then the sender, so instead of saying something like, well, you always make me feel stupid. Mm-hmm. Instead, you would say, when you said, did you forget to pay the credit card bill? Mm-hmm. I felt stupid for not remembering to put it on auto pay. So, it really sounds like, oh, we're just changing the language, but changing the language matters so much. You're only speaking on your direct experience. So you share your direct experience, and then the person that is receiving mirrors back to you. So what I heard you say was when I said, did you pay the credit card bill? What you heard was this. And then the person who sent it would say, yes, actually. And it is shockingly, it seems so simple, but just that act of realizing that your message was received. Yeah. Just that act of knowing the other person heard you, you will feel the whole body, the nervous system down regulates. There's a relaxing, okay, they do get me. They're not my opponent. And then the next step is the validating. And so this is when the receiver would say, they really just take a moment and they put themselves in your shoes. So imagining that they felt really stupid, you just really empathize and you validate and you say, wow, well, I understand if I heard that and I had, these past experiences, I might feel ashamed. I might feel stupid. And here's where they're not just repeating, but they're really showing you that they understand where you're coming from. And then that is really the key. So that third step of empathy, really identifying and really saying, I get what you're upset about. And then asking, like, is that all? Did I get it all?
Mm-hmm.
And the sender, shockingly, really, I mean, it's like this magical tool. They end up feeling like, yeah, you did hear me, and then of course you have to switch roles, right? Because usually the other person has had some kind of damage. And this is such a great process for repair.
Yeah.
Because look, we're not going to do everything right. We're going to make mistakes. We've got our own backgrounds and histories that we bring into the relationship. So just having this tool as a way to first proactively, to your original question, how can couples be proactive? Learn to communicate in this way when topics are really difficult. And actually, there's a lot of research too, that when you're having these difficult conversations, if you can just reach out and hold the person's hand. So when my husband and I are doing this process, and it's like you really don't want to in that moment because, you're still feeling so defensive. And he'll reach his hand out to me and, begrudgingly, I give my hands, but I give my hands and then, and we look in each other's eyes.
Yeah.
And then I'm sharing. And it's so much harder like that. Even just looking in someone's eyes really creates that connection. Yeah. And so that's another great tip. Like we can be proactive by when our partner is sharing something, like to really be present and to hear them.
Yeah. And it sounds like also such a powerful practice to not be defensive or kind of like feeling like you're having a face off with your partner and a little bit more like we're on a team together. I really love also, and definitely I've had those moments where Channy reaches out a hand and I look and I'm like, I am so angry, hurt, ashamed, frustrated, annoyed, any of these emotions. And the last thing I want to do is put my hand in your hand. And the moment I do, I'm like, okay, this is my partner and we're building a life together. So why am I letting all these superficial feelings, just like stay at the forefront? So
yes.
I love that.
Yes, I'm so glad that he's done that. And and it does. There's that resistance piece there. But if we just can let down and remember that we are on a team. So that's one of the activities I give my couples too, is think of a team name, create a team name together. And whatever your team name is. So let's say that you and Channing are Team Plenty. In those moments when things are really heated, if someone can just say, Team Plenty, like just that reminder that you're not opponents and that you both really do want the same thing. Every human being wants to be free of suffering, wants to be happy, wants to be healthy, wants to feel loved and cared for. So just remembering that in those times, it's hard, but important.
Yeah. And as you carry in that energy of really talking through and feeling like you're building a team, what are some of the conversations that you think couples should have as they're in the early stages of thinking about marriage and they're trying to even figure out what does it mean to be on a team together?
Yes. So I try to make things easy to remember. So this is the 4 R's in relationships that I tell them to remember. These are the 4 areas to talk about. You've got relationship. And what I mean by that is, what is this relationship going to be like? What are the boundaries that we're going to negotiate? For example, not all relationships are monogamous. There's many different types of relationships, and anything can be okay if you have 2 consenting people that are agreeing to this. So what are the boundaries? It's a lot of times we just don't talk about what those boundaries are. Or in the relationship, kids versus no kids. Yeah. That's another one. So that's the first R. Then you've got roles, responsibilities, and resources. So with roles, what roles do you imagine that you're going to play in your marriage? Well, you might not have thought that that was also going to be the role of chef or dishwasher or, grocery shopper. But these household management is one that we see comes up a lot in these surveys of what are couples disagreeing about. And so household management, like that's just another role that you're going to play. You may become co-parents, or like you were mentioning before, I coach a lot of entrepreneurs, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are also couples. So it's a whole different beast when you also have to work with your partner.
Sure.
As you know, as I know firsthand as well, it's a whole other challenge. So what are those roles? And not just, what you'd like your role to be, but really thinking about what roles were modeled for you. What were the roles that you saw growing up in your household? Because a lot of times we have a tendency to either copy what our parents did or completely rebel against. And those are like the two extremes that happen when we haven't brought mindfulness into looking at what did these examples of marriage and relationship create in us? What did they cause us to believe and how are they causing us to react in our current relationship? So just thinking about that. And then, responsibilities. What are our responsibilities? I think in every relationship, both people have the responsibility to be better communicators. Communicating is the secret to success. Like I said, it can be clunky, but it is something that is really important for you to both have that intention. And certainly those responsibilities extend to, with child rearing and investing and decision making. And what is that going to look like?
That actually almost feels a little bit clarifying. And actually almost, for me at least, it makes it feel a little bit easier to be like, the most important responsibility is learning how to be a better communicator.
Yes, because you're going to use that in all of these elements, whether you're discussing about your role or your responsibility or the resources. People will ask me, you've married a lot of people, and like, what do you think the secret to a successful marriage is? And I would say, well, the first thing besides communication is never enter into a marriage thinking that by getting married, that's going to cause the person to change in some fundamental way. I think that a lot of times it might be subtle, it might be below the surface. At this, I've seen this painfully happen several times with couples who, they thought, well, he says he doesn't want kids now, or she says she doesn't want kids now, but they'll probably change their mind. And entering into a partnership where you're hoping the person will change, well, we're all going to change naturally, right? That in a lifetime, we're probably going to be 7 totally different people. And so again, that communication, instead of needing someone to change, but being able to communicate when someone has changed in a way that is, causing things to come up for us and the dialoguing about it. So I think that's important. And then lastly, that fourth R is resources. And so, but resources isn't just about money. It's how do you spend your life? How do you spend your time? Of course, as you know, money is a triggering conversation for a lot of couples. And so often I'll find when couples come to me and they're struggling and they think that they're just arguing about one thing, but underlying that, they've got these judgments of how the other person relates to resource management. That so much of that is under the surface there. It's like, and it's okay. You don't have to be the same, but you have to know, again, what was modeled for you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with debt?
Yeah.
How do you deal with wanting to pamper yourself? And to this end, and having these conversations before marriage, this is something that is like still so shocking to me that when people talk about prenups, and then there are these really strong opinions of like, I would never ask someone to get a prenup because it somehow means that I am intending this to end, or I don't trust the other person. And that is a stigma that I wish I could immediately end, because think about it. When you enter into marriage, are you ever more in love than in that moment? Is there ever a time when you're going to be more caring for that person? It's like when you have the other person's best interests in mind, like this is the time to sit down and think about some of those things. So don't feel like a prenup, if someone brings that up, if you're the partner who is thinking, oh, that means you don't love me, then hear me say that it actually is such a loving thing to do, to have these conversations before marriage, even if they don't turn into a legal prenup. For years, I wanted to create like a prenup in a box,
Yeah.
that was like a way for couples to really just say, this is really what we think is important now while we love each other. But again, it's such a stigma. So I really hope that changes, and that couples can find a way to navigate these things before they ever become a problem.
Yeah. Couldn't agree with you more. And we will definitely have more thoughts on prenups too later this season. Excited to preview that. One thing I am also curious about too, to get your thoughts is, when you have these conversations about roles and resource, but then you change. One person change or both people change and the relationship changes. How do you have that conversation to even identify, wow, there are things that maybe we did discuss and communicate about earlier on, but it doesn't really fit anymore?
Yeah, that's a great question. This still goes back to having that tool of a way to communicate. Like that lets you be able to communicate about anything. And certainly in my own relationship, I've had this where there were things that were important to me, really important to me, that went from being the most important to barely important at all. And so we have this unspoken rule in my relationship. Well, we spoke about it in the beginning, and now we just know, when it comes to something that's going to be that we are going to be in different perspectives, the person who cares most does get a little more weight. So even if it's something that we've agreed to, we check in, like, what is your level 1 to 10 of how much you care about this? And, of course, you can't just take some intractable position and say, it's a 10. It's always a 10, but that there is going to be compromise, and knowing that that's a part of marriage, and knowing that change is a part of marriage, just really being willing to be flexible in changing your mind. And then also asking, I just had this conversation, actually. It's such a great question. I had this conversation with my husband last night because I was realizing the resource that I am short on right now is time. And some of my time is spent defending his time for the things that he needs to do. So if he needs to have this focus work time for 4 hours, well, then that means that I am doing the children and these other roles and responsibilities. We had agreed to that. But all of a sudden, my work level has changed. And now we need to renegotiate that boundary. So that's how we started the conversation. I said, hey, we had agreed on this, but we need a boundary renegotiation conversation. And that's really, you just find a way to do that and find out what's still important. Because, if you're thinking you've changed, the other person has probably changed too.
Yeah. And as you're having these conversations, do you feel like your background as a meditation teacher and someone who brings so much mindfulness into wedding ceremonies also translates into how you work with couples from a conflict resolution or even in your own relationship?
Oh, 110%. Yes, absolutely. I mean, having the background in meditation, really lets me just kind of drop into the body and into what I'm feeling and to be really present with whatever's happening. And what you learn through the practice of meditation is impermanence in a really direct and felt way. So when we're meditating and we're sitting with our thoughts, we're sitting in silence, and we realize even if we intend to sit in silence, like our thoughts will still come, and there they are. And we just learn that if we don't attach to the thoughts and we let them pass by like clouds and we keep returning to the present moment and the body and the breath, that in the same way clouds self-liberate, a lot of these things that we, think are so important, when we loosen the grip, they also self-liberate. And I think the secondary kind of wisdom that comes from that practice is recognizing that because things are impermanent, that this time with our partner is really sacred and is really special. And, the truth is we never know what's coming next, tomorrow or next lifetime. We don't know. And I think that bringing that, it can sound kind of morbid to say that, but this recognition of like, this too shall pass. And in both a good way and, a heart heavy kind of way, like this relationship won't be this relationship forever. And so I think having that perspective allows me to really just appreciate my partner for who he is now. It allows all of my couples to appreciate the moment. And I know we did this in your wedding ceremony too, but I love to have this moment in the ceremony where, because I feel like my job is to remind couples, like, this is it. You spent a lot of money. You planned it for 2 years. You took all this resource, right? Of money, of time. It went in to making this day what it is. And now that you've done that, pause, right? Like we're so trained in going to the next thing. Even when we're having a conversation with someone, our mind can be in what's for lunch, And we're at the wedding and we're like, what's going to happen at the reception? So I take this moment where I bring everyone back to just being present in that moment. And I have them, like I did with you in Channing, turn around, look at all the guests who are here. Like, this is it. This moment is it. Don't miss it. And, how to integrate that in relationships. It was like what I said before about the holding hands and looking in someone's eyes. Like my partner and I call that soul gazing, but just taking this few minutes in silence. And it might sound cheesy, but what if you did that for just 1 minute a day? What if for just 1 minute a day, you held both your partner's hands and you just stopped and you looked in their eyes and you just were present? It is incredible, the connection that can come from just really seeing and being seen, in your relationship. And so I try to bring that into everything that I do, even in having this conversation with you, just aware of my breath or aware of my body. And I think the more that we're aware of ourselves, the less likely it is that we're going to project onto the other person, that we're going to make it about something it's not. It helps us to take responsibility for our own inner landscape. And that's just so important.
Yeah. And I now have a new intention for tonight to spend that minute and remind myself to be in the moment because this is it. So thank you so much for those tips and all the advice that you have shared today, Laura. I have a few fast, quick hit questions for the end of our show, if that sounds great to you.
That sounds great.
What is one product that you've recently that has delighted you unexpectedly?
You said a product?
Yes, a product. It could be a software product. It could be a physical product.
Yes. Okay. A physical product. And it is the walking standing pad that is at my desk. So I got one of these desk treadmills, and this desk treadmill along with this, electric desk here has changed my life. The winter months, I was not getting outside so much here in the Northeast, and having this walking pad, now I'm getting, a couple hours a day in walking, and it is bringing me, so much joy.
That's incredible. Is there a trip that you and your husband have on your bucket list that you're excited about?
Oh, well, we're really excited we are going out to Nevada and to Lake Tahoe in June. My daughter got into a summer camp out there. And so she's going to go to the summer camp. And then we are going to take what we're calling a reset vacation, where we look at our manifesto again, and we spend some time with ourselves and in nature and hiking and doing all of those things and saying, okay, well, here we are, it's a decade later. What are we thinking is our intentions now? So that's what I'm looking forward more to that than to the trip itself.
Oh, well, sounds like a very special time. Thank you again for all of your time and advice today. As always, a complete pleasure. And thank you also for making our own ceremony so special. And I hope that other people who are listening now can also take some of these tips, bring a moment of presence, and also just feel more of that gratitude for their partnerships.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. It was a pleasure to be here with you.